if we have to, fight successfully the new digital issues in favor of labor power, we need to understand what is happening. What is the theory behind it? What is the political economy of a digital society? And let me step back. A political economy of any social arrangement is basically arranged around its principal resources. When it was an agrarian feudal system, land was the principal resource. And we understand and we know that everything in a feudal society was around relationships of land. Who owned the land, who was a serf, who gets the produce, what happens. So everything, who was the king, who was the subject, everything was around land. And then we moved to the industrial society. Everything was around ownership of factories and machines, and that became capital. And our current thinking about the capital labor struggle is largely situated in that industrial paradigm. What has happened actually is that the things have changed. We read a lot about data being the new oil or the new gold. Clearly, everybody seems to agree that data is the most valuable thing in a digital society. And that must be surprising that if something is the most valuable resource in a particular paradigm, why don't people talk more about what is the value of that resource, how it is denominated, who owns that resource, what are the allocatory principles around that resource? Because it's very basic. You couldn't have a feudal society without describing allocative principles around land, same with industrial society, but around data, while people agree that it's the central value, people don't talk about allocating the value of it, and there lies a tail, because immediately the issue would arise, who should legitimately own that value? And I think even to understand the value of data, people think of data as something, well, it is problematic, but not really what is problematic about it. So let's think of it not in terms of data, but in terms of intelligence. After all, what does data do? If somebody takes my data, what does that person do with that data? The person develops intelligence about me. So we should be thinking about the central resource as being intelligence and not so much data. Data contributes intelligence. And once you start looking at intelligence, somebody owning your intelligence, and you are right, Daniel, about how somebody knows about the production processes more than the worker who's next to that machine. What we have started to do is to outsource our intelligence systematically, outsource the intelligence of how we organize our lives. Google knows more about it. Outsource the intelligence about the driver not knowing where the customer is because Uber knows it. So this is a case of outsourced intelligence. And what happens with outsourced intelligence is that there are huge global corporations, which is the new form of economic organization in the digital society, which become the sole collectors of data from all places, and they use the data to convert into intelligence about everything. And this centralized intelligence then controls all actors in a sector systematically, whether it's Uber and drivers, Amazon and manufacturers and traders and logistics, or now in health, education, and such services. And I'll quickly give an example of what does it mean. Daimler's CEO, Daimler is the maker of Mercedes, said a few years back that what Google and Apple is going to do is to be the brains of the cars, and we would just be making the shells. So we should start looking at these digital corporations as being the brains of large ecosystems which control the sectors. So these are the kind of things which are happening, and I'm ready to take it forward in further questions. Let's go back to the example of the industrial society again, because I think we are into a paradigm change, and it helps to understand a new paradigm in relation to the old one. What did the public sector do in the industrial society? It developed infrastructures. These were those services where there were market failures or there were natural monopolies, and therefore you needed a different kind of a centralized player to organize them. We had infrastructures, telecommunication, transportation, roads, ports, even banking, and that it also delivered welfare services, which, whether centralized or not, were necessary for everybody to have equitably. Now, what is happening in a digital society is that on one side, the infrastructure roles are slipping away from the hands of the public sector. There are infrastructure roles which are new to a digital society. They seem to already have been taken over by digital corporations, and Google has become an infrastructure of information organizing. Facebook is your infrastructure on which media rights to be able to reach people. Amazon, and we can talk about COVID now, what Sarah was talking about, is becoming a system of essential supplies. And rather than FedEx in the US, Amazon being dependent on FedEx, it's FedEx dependent on Amazon, and Amazon is going to replace FedEx as its postal service and have its own postal service. So it becomes a system of essential deliveries. So where some of the new digital infrastructures, like information systems and communication systems, are already, they were born digital and private, but even the existing infrastructures, like I was talking about postal system, but also transportation, like Uber is doing, is becoming now privatized. So the public sector is seeing this role of infrastructure development and management slipping out of their hands. And also the core functions like public education, health, etc., is increasingly gets datafied. And now what happens when something gets datafied and digitalized is that we tend to think of something when it is digital and technology as essentially private. Automatically, you go to an office and you want to, talk about something digital, they'll get the technical people to talk to you because they think, oh, well, it's digital, it's technical, and therefore it's something which a private sector would do best. Now, it may have been right when the digital technologies were new and we needed that private sector help. But by and by, as owners of digital technologies, the big digital corporations are eating up real substantive sectors like transportation, essential supplies, and so on. Everything gets privatized. So for the public sector, the challenge, of course, is to claim back its positions. How to claim back the traditional industrial infrastructures like transportation, etc., which it in any case controlled, and how to take control of new infrastructures like the Google search infrastructure, cloud computing infrastructures, and so on. And this is happening in sector after sector. In health, if the data collection has to be done, the National Health Service would outsource it to Google because they think Google can do it better. But by and by, the competencies which Google develops about health sector, which are in the intelligence of that sector, becomes so valuable that that part becomes the top of the value chain of the health sector. And therefore, Google starts controlling the health sectors. So what is happening by and by is that the public sector is losing its core role, and big digital corporations are taking it over. And then, of course, there's the issue of territorial, the nation state being territorial, and most of these corporations are global. And therefore, the chances of territorial public sector being able to stand up to a global corporation is greatly reduced. And this is the kind of situation which is going ahead so fast that soon we would have private sector giving all the infrastructural and so-called welfare services as well. And the role of the public sector is greatly reduced. And we are moving into that kind of a situation. From your point of governments not understanding the value of data. People also don't understand the value of data. And as you had said earlier, the value of data is in aggregates. And nobody is ready to talk about the value of aggregate data and collective rights to data. The first thing, therefore, we need to do, and it's so obvious because if data is the principal resource of a digital society, as I spoke earlier, like with the case of feudal society, without allocations of relationships and rights around land, you couldn't have a well-organized feudal society. And so with the industrial society, the first thing we need to do is to understand who should own the value of data. And here the principal problem is that the default here is whoever collects data owns the entire value of data, not because there is a law that that person has the rights to that data, because there is no law that who has the rights to data. So anybody who collects any kind of data has the entire economic rights to data. And the only thing we really need to talk about is privacy and all, which is very important as human rights level, but economic rights level are also important, where we don't talk about the value, not just of individual data, which has some value, but a huge amount of value in an artificial intelligence-based society increasingly is of the anonymized and other forms of non-personal data. So the first thing we need to do is to actually write down in our laws that data economic rights belong to the source of the data as an individual, but as importantly, as a community. Now, if you have anonymized data about commuting patterns of New Delhi, that data is not something anybody who collects it can run away and own its entire economic value. That data belongs to the city of New Delhi. That city should have ways to license that data, control its uses, say that this data would only be used by cooperatives for some parts of, or some kind of functions, it only be used by cooperatives. We need to do first, what we need to do is write down a law about economic rights to data, and what in India we started to talk about community ownership of data. Once you talk about community data and community ownership of data, from that also we are able to derive other forms of collective ownerships of data. For example, Uber drivers can collectively own the data which they contribute, which alone makes Uber such a big corporation. The New Delhi Uber drivers collectively own the data which the drivers give to Uber. And the Uber operation in New Delhi is based on that data. And this kind of right to that data should be able to, for example, claim some kind of a co-ownership of Uber operations. They can insist that there should be some seats on the board of Uber, and this kind of co-ownership by workers of industries is something which the German constitution, I understand, already has. So use data rights, collective data rights, to co-own or participate in decision-making in the digital corporations is a big thing. But then we have to do many other kind of policies. We have to ensure that the data systems and intelligence systems of a society are distributed and federated. It would require many kind of legal and technostructural systems, which I cannot go into at length here, but there are some initiatives happening. For example, there is an initiative called GAIA, G-A-I-A-X, in EU, about a federated digital ecosystem. There's another one which Government of India is coming out. So we need to have digital systems, its data systems and intelligence federated. We have to reclaim public sector's role, some kind of roles in the new digital ecosystems. For example, data infrastructures, interoperability platforms. Again, a lot of work is happening in Europe and some in India as well, have to be reclaimed as public sector roles. Third thing, we need to look at nation-based strategies. A lot of global trade rules talk about free flow of data and uninhibited play for global digital corporations, so that there is a single global economy where these global corporations can play. Now, that does not allow the territorial national states to claim some part of the digital ecosystem as theirs, whereby they can develop public systems as well. So we need to, kind of slightly territorialize the global digital economy. And of course, at a more immediate level, we have to, in the public sector, configure policies, how to manage outsourcing to technology players, how to retain control over that outsourcing, how to retain control over data, how to retain over intelligence and retain ownership over them. These kind of issues then become important.